Okay, so today what we're going to look at is this paper that I wrote as a part of my PhD, which is called What Knowledge is of Most Worth? The Educational Politics of Research Creation in Epistemology. Again, refreshing that epistemology is the field of philosophy that asks of the value of knowledge. It's also called axiology. And I'm going to bring you through an overview of this paper, which will form the bedrock or the starting point for our conversation in class. So anytime you see a journal article, a great thing to do is to take a look at the abstract, and I'll share this link as well with Mr. Ruske, and it'll help overview a little bit about what the paper is, and that's always in the abstract. So this article discusses the rise of research creation. Research creation is using art as a form of valid knowledge making or as research. It asks essentially the central question, what knowledge is of most worth? And that's a question I've been interested in asking for a few years now, and I've been studying across my master's and doctorate and asking, how do we come to know what knowledge is of most worth, and who decides what knowledge is of most worth? And so I kind of started off in a little bit of a playful way by writing this poem out. Touching slowly, a finger across the page, a tap on the keyboard, a kiss on the forehead, new tab, a handshake, a board meeting, an office cry, a sweet goodbye, escape key, new tab, google.ca, how to assess art, enter. And I ask my reader, is this a good poem? What constitutes a good poem? As an English teacher who often marks poetry, I ask myself that question consistently. What makes a good poem? And what makes a good poem to me may not make a good poem to someone else. That subjectivity of assessment is something that I dive into a little bit deeper down. So you can read, of course, this whole article, but I'm giving you essentially the main jumping off points in bold. And what I'm interested in is there's been a rise of this idea called research creation as of late. And research creation essentially is art as research. So instead of looking at reading and writing essays, research creation is a form of research or inquiry that doesn't use necessarily reading or writing. It means dancing, painting, creating, and it doesn't just have to be artistic, okay? Why do you have to do your personal project, let's say building a drone, and then it's the written part that's assessed? Why does it always come back to the essay, the written word? Why can't we make something and that be enough of the knowledge? Why do we continually have to assess knowledge in a very small container? So that's what I'm investigating here. And I take this idea that school right now is all about what something means. We are looking at, especially in English and social, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this simile mean? What does this reading mean? But I am instead interested in asking, what does something do? What does something do for the world? What does it do in its repercussions for others? Okay. I ask here that, just because something can't be assessed, like making a drone or, dancing or something like that, I say this ephemeral and affective pull of witnessing and participating in art refuses validation to justify itself. There is no, what is this play about, or what does this art suggest, but instead, what does this art do to me, to institutional spaces and to relationships? And so I'm interested in the conversations that you have with friends in your car as equally as a knowledge-making practice as writing an essay about something. And we know that sometimes we can have amazing conversations through text, through watching a TikTok, but yet at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. That knowledge does not count. I ask here seriously, what makes something good or bad knowledge, especially, and I use art as my central example through all of this. What makes something good or bad? Is art good if you feel something from it? Is art good if you are pushed to question your life about it? What if you feel nothing from it? Is it than bad. And so I think that we use the rubric that we use to disguise what is good and bad is actually from a Euro-Western knowledge system. And the idea of what makes something good or bad from a Western knowledge system is really encapsulated by Akenda's quote here, and I'll read it aloud for you. So the production of legitimate knowledge has been closely related to the context, class affiliation, and the social identity of the producers. European colonizers have defined legitimate knowledge as Western knowledge. Essentially, European colonizers' ways of knowing is often taken as objective and universal knowledge. That includes things that we take for granted all the time, from the scientific method to the written essay in the humanities. Those are considered valid knowledge forms. But why is dancing any less of a knowledge form? I say here, Akenda's quote allows us to read the idea of research creation, of making instead of writing all the time, of talking, of whatever it is, research creation, as a social argument in pursuit of not only what knowledge is of most worth, but how did that worth get assigned to knowledge? And in an era of truth and reconciliation, what does it mean to reassign knowledge as worth? We know that many indigenous cultures have knowledge systems that seek to surpass the reading and writing framework that European colonizers have set up. And then I give an example here to look at the cultural wrapping of knowledge. For example, male-dominated fields like STEM are often romanticized as objective fields that utilize logic and the scientific method, while female-centric fields like visual arts, drama, and education are seen as caring professions. So we see things like art, the poetic, as romantic and feminine and emotional. Even the idea of connecting the emotional to feminine and the logical to man, and we know that logic holds up in knowledge systems, is perhaps representative of sexism within epistemology. To extend this claim, we can suggest that logic, productivity, and the scientific method are perceived as more masculine attributes, and creativity, affect, which means emotion, and art as more feminine attributes. Which one of those is paid more as a field? Here we can see how research creation's value as an affective art form is socially and culturally implicated. So here we can see that in bringing up an argument for epistemology, I'm also bringing up an argument for culture, cultural knowledges that also count. I go on here to say that podcasts, films, comic books, and paintings, due to their accessible and public form, produce a low instead of high brow culture. And because everyone can listen to podcasts and everyone has Instagram, that makes it not rare. And in capitalism, one of the tenets is that rarity equals value. So if everybody could do calculus, if everybody could read Shakespeare fluently, would it be seen as less prestigious than it is? Or is the fact that something is rare and not everyone can get it, make it a more valuable knowledge? Interesting. So I am asking by what rubric we decipher what scholarship or knowledge counts as low or high. Who decided that watching Netflix is any less than reading a book? You know, it's funny, Shakespeare wasn't taught in schools for a very long time because it was too popular. It was like reading pop culture. And now it's seen as one of the tenets of an esteemed education. I think that these kind of knowledge spaces like Netflix, talking with your friend on a drive, or texting or memes can actually be rich knowledge sites that are going untapped because we vilify them and say that they are not as esteemed or prestigious. But I think that that is an archaic way at looking at knowledge, and instead we can redefine knowledge and look at it from multiple avenues, saying that paintings and podcasts and films can be spaces of rich intellectual curiosity and depth, but because we value so much, the harder something is, the more inaccessible it is, like a hard skill, then it must be more valuable. And what's interesting is there's hard skills that people can't do, like dancing, you might say, and say, well, that's hard and that's not valued. That's interesting. Is that because it's seen as an emotion, a creative, or a more feminine discipline? And that sets up a disciplinary hierarchy. Essentially, I want to bring you the most important thing to these guiding questions from this paper. So even the idea of what we force you to take, and by we I mean the government, as a core subject, math, social science, and English, who decided that? Who made up that idea that those are the most important subjects? And what's elective? Art, drama, music, right? That's interesting. To what extent do the value systems of disciplines, which means what discipline should get more value, create a hierarchy in answering this question, what knowledge is of most worth? And does this question of what knowledge is of most worth have economic repercussions? I mean, if you go to your parents and say, I want to be a poet versus I want to be an engineer, we're set up in a society that has answered that for us. One of those is going to make more money than the other. And both are hard skills, but in setting up a hierarchy of disciplines, essentially a hierarchy of knowledge systems, does have economic repercussions. Here's my second guiding question for you that we'll address in class together. In what ways do reading and writing, educational tools that are actually residual from the residential school system, reinforce colonial values in education, right? We live in an educational system that prioritizes the English language, that prioritizes reading and writing. All of those things were also prioritized in residential school systems. If we take seriously this idea of truth and reconciliation and truly decolonizing, which means stripping away the colonial construct that's enforced the school system, would we be speaking Cree in schools? Would we be able to dance and have ceremony and ritual as equally as valid knowledge forms? Here's my third question to you. In what ways do we associate cultural assumptions to these disciplines? Why is math more powerful in our economy than creative writing? In what ways can we interrogate gender and class as part of these disciplinary hierarchies? Right? There's so many initiatives for women in STEM. Why are not as many women in STEM? That becomes an interesting question to me, is why do we view some things as soft subjects like English or social or writing or music or drama, electives, and other things as harder and more core? And do we get more value from those? Where did we get that idea from? And do we want to keep holding on to it? If we take seriously this idea that value equals rarity in capitalism, a diamond is only rare or valuable because it is rare to acquire, is knowing something that most people don't know mean that you're smarter? If everyone could read Shakespeare fluency, would that make it less prestigious? So I'm interested in hearing what you think about these questions, and I want to raise them up in class. And so you're welcome to go over this paper again. But essentially what I'm asking is, why can't you dance your diploma exam? Why can't you draw me a picture as a part of a midterm? Why do those not count as knowledge forms? Who decided that? And should we continue to believe that, or is it an inheritance, an ideological inheritance that we kind of want to work against? And if that is the case, if we want to open up our ideas more to saying dance counts and art counts and making podcasts and TikToks, I mean, excuse me, some of those are some of the most valid knowledge forms in the 21st century. You can get famous off TikTok and YouTube. Why are we not teaching you that? The question I want to leave you with is this: what knowledge is of most worth? Who decided? What rubric did they use to decide? And do we want to keep it as it is? I look forward to seeing you in class.